Hello, welcome to Let's Discuss the Paper right after reading it. So for a Let's Discuss session, we choose a paper that we want to read 2 hours ago, and then we read it in 2 hours, and now we come back to discuss it. Today we have two people. Yota, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Yota Koshima. I'm doing a research assistant in Japan.
Okay. My name is Qian Chen, and I'm currently a PhD student at Monash University, Australia. So the paper we read and will discuss today is by Go et al., published, I believe, this week on PNAS, titled The Perception of Silence. Now, I'll first give a summary of this paper, and then we'll discuss any questions we have. This paper addresses a rather controversial topic in auditory perception, which is our perception of silence, but not sounds. So intuitively, our auditory experience composed of sounds of people's voices, musical notes, etc. So it's very easy to imagine sounds being genuine objects of our auditory experience. But now, what about silence? And about silence, there are two views on, what's the nature of it. And many scientists and philosophers have been endorsing a view that we can simply treat silence as a failure to hear any sounds, from which, silence is inferred from this failure of perception. And because of this cognitive inference component in this field, they're often called the cognitive view of silence. But recently, some other researchers and philosophers start to argue that we actively hear silence, just like we hear sounds. Here, silence itself, therefore, is an object of auditory perception, just like sounds. And we can also label this view as the perceptual view of silence. And so far, there isn't any study that is able to empirically address this debate and tell us what is the nature of silences. And the aim of the current study, therefore, is to address this research gap by testing whether silence is a valid object of auditory perception. To do this, they made use of auditory illusions induced by the event segmentation process of auditory processing. Now I will, I'll explain, the novel ideas in this statement. So what is event segmentation process? For this process, it basically means the auditory input that we receive from the environment are continuous, but we hear discrete sounds. And that is because our auditory system actively segregates these inputs into discrete events, producing discrete sounds that we hear. And there exists some auditory illusions exploiting this process, where if you present, some kind of discrete sounds in a particular way, then you'll be able to distort people's perception of duration. Importantly, in the past, these auditory illusions are produced by sounds. The question here is, if silence is also a valid object of perception just like sounds, then replacing sounds with silence in these auditory illusions will also distort people's perception of duration. So with this in mind, they designed 7 experiments. In experiment 1 to 3, they use an auditory illusion, which they termed one silence is more illusion. Now, this illusion is adapted from the original one is more sound illusion. In the original illusion, the participants judge one continuous sound as longer than 2 discrete sounds that actually went for the same duration as that continuous sound. And to test whether silence is equivalent to sound, the authors of this study simply replaced the sound with silence in the illusions. And what they did was they first immersed the participants in ambient noise, such as noise in restaurants or on the streets or in the bar. And then they present either one continuous silence period or two discrete silence periods. And they asked the participant to judge whether that continuous silence was longer or the two discrete silence together composed for a longer time. And what they found is the participants consistently judge the one continuous silence as longer than two discrete silences. And this finding is robust regardless of the behavioral measures you ask for, whether you ask them to simply judge after hearing or you ask them to reproduce the duration of the silences. And it's also robust against the alternative explanation where people get distracted if they hear continuous silence and which distorts their judgment, that kind of alternative explanation. In experiment 426, they try a different auditory illusion, which is called silence-based wrapping. Again, this silence-based wrapping is adapted from a previous sound illusion, where in this sound illusion, a pair of tones are judged further apart in time if they are embedded within an auditory event, such as ambient noise, compared to when they're just present against pure silence. And here they adapted the illusion to create two silence conditions. One is called embedded silence, and the other is called pure silence. In the embedded silence, they first, again, immerse the participants in ambient noise, and then they hear two tone pairs during periods of silence. And in this embedded silence condition, therefore, the silence period is wrapped in noise. And in the pure silence condition, the participant do not get immersed, do not hear the ambient noise. They just sit there in pure silence and hear a pair of tones. In both conditions, the participants were asked to judge the duration between the two tones within the pair. And same as their finding with the sound wrapping illusion, they found that participants judged the tone pairs in the embedded silence conditions as further apart in time than the pure silence condition. Again, this finding is robust against the alternative explanations, such as in the embedded silence, participants will have to make their judgments in ambient noise, which can distract their judgments or something like that. Anyways, now to the seventh experiment, they use an illusion called oddball silences. So experiment 7 is slightly different from experiment 1 to 6 in the sense that here they explore the idea of partial silence. In experiment 1 to 6, they examined absolute silence. You either hear ambient noise, all the sounds, or absolutely no sound. Here they ask the question of in everyday life, we also deal with partial silence, which is one sound, let's say within a broader sound landscape, is suddenly muted. And do this kind of partial silence also become unique objects of auditory perceptions? To answer this question, they make use of an oddball silence illusion, which is adapted from the oddball sound illusion. So in the original oddball sound illusion, they found that a high tone that disrupts a sequence of low tone is perceived as longer. And in their adapted oddball silence paradigm, they asked participants to first immerse in a sound landscape of two tones playing, continuously and simultaneously. Now we call the two tones tone 1 and 2. And the participants will hear 4 non-target partial silences created by muting tone 1 in a fixed duration each time, while the tone 2 keeps on playing. And finally, they present a target partial silence. And there are 2 types of this kind of target silence. First type is the standard silence, where they also mute tone 1, making the standard silence the same as the non-target silences. But they also have another type, which is called oddball silence, where this time they mute tone 2 rather than tone 1. So it's different from the non-target partial silences. And they asked the participant to judge the target silence duration. And what they found was participants consistently judge the oddball silences as longer than the standard silences. So in summary, through 7 experiments, the authors made use of the event segmentation process in auditory system. They demonstrated that silence, both partial and complete ones, are genuine objects of auditory perception, just like sounds. Yep, that's it. Do you have anything to add?
No.
Okay, do we have any questions?
Yes, I have some questions. But before that, yeah, this paper was really interesting. Yeah, I have never thought, silence as, perception. But
yes,
yeah, just, again, just interesting to read. So my question is like, yeah, here they are talking about silence, so the auditory perception, and in the discussion they mention the possible application to other modalities, and they mention vision. But I'm not sure what is the correspondence of silence in vision.
Yeah, so your question actually overlap with mine.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. So that's what I have been thinking as well. It's maybe this is a kind of a structural difference between visual and auditory experience, in a sense that it's really hard to imagine not seeing anything compared to not hearing anything. For not hearing anything, it's not the right word for silence anymore, right? According to this paper. But anyways, in auditory perception, you at least still have the word silence to describe this, but there's no equivalent word for silence in vision.
Yeah. So of course we can, have, several interpretation or just a way to think the perspective, and then the silence in vision, in audition, if we think about what's happening in the, not brain, but the cochlea, or the just neuron detecting a sound vibrations. The silence basically mean that these neurons do not or just silent. I mean that not spiking, right, by the stimuli. So if we think that way, then we can have a correspondence in vision. So let's say this, no light, meaning that the retina, neurons in retina do not activated by the light. So I guess this is the correspondence of the silence. I think.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then they give an example for vision, which is holes.
Yeah.
So what they mean is probably like, for like a complete natural scene image, you use the computer to generate some kind of how do I say this, to make certain parts transparent, or like replace it with like black color.
Yeah. So I don't think just presenting blank screen is not the same as the silence in audition. That's
yeah. You still see the blank screen, and it's still an experience in itself.
Yeah, and the black screen again, But I don't know if it's, completely black. It's maybe almost the same as closing an eye. But, usually I imagine that, the screen is not that big, right? So you will have another, input outside the screen. So that
Well,
still can be considered as some kind of, yeah.
well, you can use like massive displays or virtual reality setups, but I don't know. I feel like silence in auditory perception, silence is itself an object of perception. Maybe it's similar to Tononi's example on information, where seeing a complete black screen itself constitute a unique experience in vision.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of related to my another comment or questions. So even though we don't have any sensory input, we still have some perception experience, and this maybe can be, and by the way, this study is focused on only behavioral data. They didn't mention anything about the brain data, right? So maybe it's interesting, what we will see. I don't know what kind of brain activity corresponds to the perception of silence.
It's especially, I think silences are to some extent a constructed object in perception. It's it's hard to imagine that you're not receiving any input at all. Right? You still receive some levels of stimulations in the auditory system, but it's considered silence. So it's the same as partial silence. Some sound went off and then it's gone. So there must be a unique neural correlate for when there is silence, and it will be different for someone who's deaf.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe it's not related, but I still need to think about it, but I start to feel like maybe it's not like I don't know, perception, because their logic was like this. We have this illusion in we usually used or induced by sound. And then what happened if we replace that sound with blank, no stimuli? And then if they are, or they show the same, effect, then therefore they are the same thing. That's kind of, their logic. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that, I don't know. It's just, how, event representation works, not like, perception per se. That's what I was thinking, but, I don't know.
So
again, I'm not sure about this. So
what you're trying to say is silence is also an auditory event. And
yeah, it just,
do you really not hear anything during silence, or silence is still in contrast to in contrast to when you hear sound? To some extent, in the context of this study, would be silence is in contrast to the ambient noise, and during the experiment, maybe the participant can still hear, these facilities having like the really low humming sounds or something like that. But as in contrast to the ambient noise, this is treated as silence. So it's like a level thing.
So, yeah, I mean, so I tried the, experiment demo they provided in the paper, and then I agree that we have a perception of silence. But, yeah, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, it also makes me start to think whether the dichotomy they presented at the beginning was, truly that different, right? Failure to not hear any sounds. Maybe what you can understand the so-called cognitive view as silence, to treat silence as just not hearing any sounds, but it's in itself not a unique auditory event, but the perceptual view would treat it as in itself a unique perceptual event. But I feel like to categorize a certain segment of auditory input as silence, you still need some kind of cognitive inference.
So, yeah, I agree that, the silence can be considered as one event. And this, study clearly shows that. But I don't know whether it's, directly, or we can make a claim based on this result that, because of this, the silence is a perception or type of perception. I don't know. I'm not sure about this part. So maybe better to, go to another question, which is, again, I still don't have a clear opinion, but, here we are doing, of course, or participants doing this experiment while they were awake. And maybe it's interesting if we compare the, brain activities, or it's impossible to, or maybe not easy to, get the behavioral data, but, from the sleep data and see, I'm sure that, in deep sleep, where you will not have conscious perception, you will not have, conscious experience of sound and, silence. So you will not have conscious perception, conscious experience, regardless of the stimuli. And here, we have, the yeah, I don't know. Again, not clear. Still, I need to think about it. But maybe we can do something interesting when we compare this result with sleep data, where they don't have, participants do not have conscious experience, and maybe we can see, okay, this neural activity corresponds to perception of silence. Yeah.
I understand your point. I do remember there are studies that shows we do track speech even during sleep, but I'm not sure whether
Yeah.
whether consciously they are
Mm.
saved or not. I don't remember the details of those studies,
Mm.
but even in sleep, our auditory system is more active than we
Yeah.
think.
Mm. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, along this line, I was also thinking, what is the threshold of some event being treated as silence? I feel like to some extent, silence is created from contrast.
Mm.
When there's no other sound, let's say you are like alone in your apartment, which is compared to when you're walking on the street, that's silence. But then you will start to hear like the refrigerator sounds or something like that.
Yeah.
So and then your threshold for silence now reduced to when you turn off the refrigerator, right? Something like that. So I would be really interested if there are studies that look at what level of contrast do we need to treat one event as silence while the other is not.
So I think that's something to do with adaptation. Adaptation. Like a visual adaptation, like function can explain that. But maybe it's better to mention that in the discussion they mentioned that here they use the term silence, but it's not the complete silence, right? You still hear, or not you, but participant might hear or listen to some sounds during the silence period. So yeah, maybe it's better to check the contrast, what is the the level or ratio you will need to treat one event as silent and the others sound.
Yeah.
But anyway, I sleep. And my last comment is that so not all participants show the same effect. I think at least in figure 2A, the top left, they show the the result from all participants, and then on average, yes, we have the effect we want to see, but some participants show the opposite. So yeah. I don't know, what does it mean? Is this just a noise, or for them silence is not perception, or maybe the same participant show the same trend for stimulus with sound. So if that's the case, that can be a robust evidence that the silence and the sound are just the same across all the participants. But yeah, that's just my last comment on this paper.
How many participants did they test in total? How many participants did they test in total?
How many? I don't know.
Yeah, I also don't know. I need to check.
Yeah. Oh wait, I found it. Yeah, 600 subject total. So they have. Wait.
Yeah, 600.
Yeah.
100 for experiment 1.
Yeah. And then they recruited 400 subjects from 7 for experiment 7. Okay.
Here's
Okay. This is
Please.
online experiment then.
Hmm.
Prolific. Okay, that's okay. I see.
So if that's the case, then in experiment 1, there's quite a a subset of participants that perceive the opposite. Maybe interesting to look into this subset.
Yeah, they may have some, deficit in their audition.
Or they have some expertise.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But yeah. Anyway. Yeah, that's it from me. Chasha, how about you?
Yeah, I also don't have any other questions.
Okay.
So yeah, then we can stop here.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.